So tell us a little bit about universal basic income.
Sure.
Go deeper. You gave us sort of a teaser in your talk. Why? Why did you come to that? How did you come to that? And why does it matter?
Yes. So how many of you know a lot about universal basic income? Raise your hand if you know a lot. All right, most of you don't know anything. So about universal basic income. So when I was reading various books about the future of work, automation, technology, a lot of them landed on universal basic income as a recommendation. And so I started digging into the history, and it turns out that this is an idea where everyone gets a certain amount of money, free and clear, no questions asked to meet your basic needs. So my plan, the freedom dividend, would give every American adult starting at age 18 $1,000 a month to do whatever you want. So you're all, I think, 18 or over. So you'd all just be getting $1,000 a month, and you would just be, in many of your cases, you'd just be applying it to school. But if you weren't here at Georgetown, you would still be getting the money, and you could do whatever you want. So this is an idea that was with the founding fathers. Thomas Paine was for it. He called it the citizen's dividend. Martin Luther King championed this as a guaranteed minimum income the year before he was killed. And then in the 70s, Milton Friedman and 1,000 economists championed this idea, so much so that Richard Nixon passed it, or it passed the House of Representatives twice under Nixon in 1971. And there's one state today where they did pass a dividend where everyone in that state gets between $1,000 and $2,000 a year. And what state is that?
Alaska.
And how do they fund it?
Oil.
And what is the oil of the 21st century? Technology. And so what they're doing for Alaska with oil money, we're going to do for the rest of the country with technology money. They call it the oil check in Alaska. We're going to call this the tech check, and everyone's going to love the tech check.
If you're a student at Georgetown, why does this matter to you right now?
Well, if you're a student at Georgetown, you're mostly just stressed out about like what your summer internship's going to be, what your job after graduation is going to be. And I would suggest that even for you all, even though many of you are from like very, very strong backgrounds, $1,000 a month would actually be a difference maker for you too. Where if you were coming out of school, it'd be like, hey, if I had $1,000 a month, maybe it'd be more realistic for me to take that creative job or do something a little bit off the beaten path. And so if we had that freedom dividend in place, and if you're a freshman or sophomore here, if I become president, I'm going to try and make this real for you by the time you graduate. But your options do get increasingly constrained. And the perversion is that in some ways, the better you do in our meritocracy, the more you feel like you don't have a choice.
Go deeper on that one. What do you mean by that?
Well, I went to Exeter and Brown and Columbia for law school, and my friends and I did the same things in the same places. And then when I became an entrepreneur and started this failed company, my friends were advancing at these law firms. They're doing better and better, and they had fancy parties and birthday dinners I couldn't afford to go to, and it made me feel very, very small and bad about myself. So, I mean, it's just human nature. I mean, it's fine, whatever. So that's what I mean is that you naturally end up comparing yourself to a very rarefied peer group, and then you feel like you have to keep up with the Joneses.
And so you've been going around the country. I've heard a lot of your talks about universal basic income and running for president. A large part of this is really you're pushing this narrative, this question of what's going to happen to jobs in the future. What's been the reaction?
In Iowa and New Hampshire and places like that, they get it like this. Because if you're in a rural part of this country, you're just seeing the vitality leave, the people leave. You don't have any meaningful paths forward. Schools are consolidating because there's not enough kids. And so if I go there and I say, hey, have you noticed stores closing? They're like, heck yes. And many of you probably did not live in manufacturing communities, but Iowa was a manufacturing community and lost 40,000 manufacturing jobs. So if you say to them, do you know manufacturing workers that lost their jobs? They're like, heck yes. The biggest truck stop in the country is in Iowa 80, in Davenport, Iowa. So you say, hey, do you know truck drivers? Everyone knows truck drivers because it's a massive trucking hub. So one of the things that we've found on the campaign trail is that the people that are closest to the scene understand it like that. This is one reason why I'm going to shock the world coming up, because you'll see I have outsized strength in Iowa and New Hampshire. And that right now, I'm already polling at 1% right now, and most people have never heard of Andrew Yang. But I'm going to make the debate stage in June, And then because most Americans who are actually living the economy I'm describing understand that what I'm saying is 100% right, it's a very, very powerful message. If anything, the message is trickier in places where they're not experiencing the same ways.
So I'm one of those economists you're making fun of. Economics would say, why doesn't labor move to where the jobs are?
So I'm a numbers guy, and the rate of interstate migration right now in the United States of America is a multi-decade low. People aren't even moving across state lines as much as they did in past eras. And given the dynamism of the economy, you'd hope for the opposite. So if you actually go to these areas and say, hey, why is no one moving? Underwater in their mortgage, they have family members there. Like, it's actually very hard to move. And if you don't have savings, it's even harder to move. Moving for a new job requires a level of resources and confidence and optimism. And that is missing from many, many Americans at this point.
So how do we, who are sitting sometimes in Washington, D.C., or some of these cities like San Francisco, Chicago, New York, think about what's happening with the rest of the country?
Well, it's been really interesting, Sonal, because I presented facts. Like I spoke at a conference of 70 CEOs, and I actually have a fancy slide deck with like all of this data, just saying like, here it is, and people see it, and it's hard for people to understand the data in many ways. Like one data point I present is that 40% of American children are born to an unmarried mother now, and that's unusual in the experience of most of the CEOs in that room because everyone around them like lives in a two-parent household type of environment. And so the translation of the experience to people who live in prosperous coastal areas, it's not easy. It's like if I knew a better way to do that, I'd be conveying it more impactfully.
And as you think about kind of what propelled you to run for president? You gave us a little bit of a teaser again, but running for president is not a small thing. You kind of went in from running a successful company after the failure to starting VFA to then saying, I'm going to run for president because I can make this change happen. Why?
Well, there are two attitudes in life. I found one to be more accurate. So the first attitude is someone else will take care of this. And the second is I'm going to have to take care of this. And I've actually met many of the other people who are running for president. And many of them are very fine individuals. Many of them are patriots. They're earnest public servants. But most of them have very, very limited exposure to technology and its intersection with the workforce. And many of them, unfortunately, have only a foggy sense of how the economy functions, in my experience. And it's not a knock on them. It's like if you've been in certain environments for a couple of decades, or you were born in the 1940s, no offense to anyone, but if you were born in the 1940s, some of these issues are not going to be things that you naturally understand. And so I saw the landscape and I said, this problem is definitely not going to get addressed in the right time frame if I don't do something about it. And so I drew up the various paths and what my risk reward was. And I said, okay, if I put my heart and soul into this, I think I can accelerate the eradication of poverty and meaningful solutions to what I see as systemic threats and failures. So if you don't make that move and you think you have a legitimate chance to do that much good, then you have a very, very limited sense of yourself and morality.
So there are, at least from what I can count, 10 candidates in the race right now on the Democratic side. How does Andrew Yang stand out?
Well, the first thing is that, I'm suggesting I'm going to get $1,000 a month, which, people tend to, that gets their wheels turning. It's somewhat polarizing, but then when people dig into it, a lot of people are like, wow, that would actually be a huge difference maker for me. The other thing that seems to be happening, I did not realize it was this severe, but just the fact that I'm talking about numbers and policy is actually vastly different from most other politicians. So when I address a group of 200, 700 Iowans, they come up to me afterwards and say, you don't sound like any politician I've heard. And then that gets me a really enthusiastic 10 to 15%, which in a very crowded field is enough for me to compete at the highest levels.
So some of the other pieces that you talked about was big M market.
Yes.
And you have policies that you think about in terms of the big end market, not just universal basic income, but you're thinking about how to think about the market differently. Give us a few of those ideas.
Sure. So our political system at this point has been captured by huge corporate interests and moneyed interests. So the way you counteract that is you give every citizen 100 democracy dollars that can only be donated to a political campaign. And that would wash out the corporate money because $100 times even a minority of citizens is a much higher sum than all of the money that's being spent on lobbyists and the rest of it. So that one move ends up recapturing democracy and making it so that if someone like me appeals to 10,000 people, I get $1 million. Whereas right now, I have to appeal to 10,000 people and then go get the $1 million from some rich people. I mean, it's the real process. So if you can actually unify the money and the people, then you can fix democracy. You know, it's not that hard. The problem is going to be getting that passed because the corporate interests have spent billions of dollars locking up the system to their own benefit.
So 100 democracy dollars.
Per American adult per year, and that would do the trick.
So every 18-year-old who can vote would get 100 democracy dollars?
Yes, and then if you don't use it, you lose it, so it doesn't stack. So then towards the end of the year, all these politicians would be like, hey, like give to my campaign, and then you'd be like, you know, let's choose someone good. But that would still be an enormous victory. I would ban robocalling because, like, how are we getting harassed by robocalls? And you know, in like this day and age, like I used to like it when my phone rang. Now it's like, like you know, getting harassed. I would pay NCAA athletes because it's immoral that we have institutions benefiting the tune of millions of dollars and then say like, oh, you're getting an education. And then literally they're like video games with their face on it and they're scrounging for meal money. Like that's not cool. So there are a lot of things we can do that would right the wrongs that we can all see. And one of my friends, Eric Weinstein, said two things. First, he said that we never knew that capitalism was going to get eaten by its son, technology. Which is where we are now. But the second thing he said is that this economy is making liars of us all because you go around selling this growth model and then you tell people, frankly, people like you, it's like, hey, join me and then the growth model will be yours and the riches will be yours. But the growth model is breaking down right and left and no one's telling you this. It's true, one example is academia. It used to be that you'd get a PhD and then you'd like try and become a tenure track professor. And then now you're just in this postdoc purgatory. You're never going to be made a professor, and they're just going to keep you around for cheap labor forever. So they're making liars of these institutions. They're making liars of the law schools who are like, come on in, you'll have a secure career, and it turns out you won't. So there are things going on right now that are actually corruptive because it's in everyone's interest to keep the lies going.
Are all y'all paying attention? Automation gonna sweep the nation unless we get him in. Andrew Yang, 2020 freedom dividend. Climate change is real again. Science.